Welcome, everyone. You are listening to Get Out of Your Own Way with me, April Yee, on Transformation Talk Radio. Get out of your way and get what you want through transformative self-care. I'm here to support you in getting out of your own way. So what does getting in your own way look like? Well, how about letting other people define your value and worth, ignoring your body by not taking care of yourself, and people-pleasing? These are just a few ways I've gotten in my own way. In this show, I'll share new perspectives on self-care practices so you can discover options and choices for expanding what's possible for you and your life. In each episode, I have questions for you, and when you take the time to answer them, they'll help in building up your belief about yourself. I believe that when we get good with ourselves, we get good with our lives and the world. Get out of your own way starts now. Hi, everyone. You are listening to Get Out of Your Own Way on Transformation Talk Radio, episode 18. The concepts I talk about in each episode are things I wish I learned sooner to support myself and get out of my own way. So I hope these concepts and ideas are coming to you when you need them. For today's episode, I have the fourth of several guests visiting the podcast, and each of my guests, like all of us, have gotten in their own way in some aspect of their life, how to get out of their own way with support, resources, and wisdom that they've gained along their journey. And since this podcast is called Get Out of Your Own Way, I'll be asking my guests, how have you gotten in your own way, and how did you learn to get out of your own way? And we'll be hearing from them and their stories, and you might even recognize yourself in what they share. So today I'm happy to have Jennifer Bulbrook with me to talk. And I met Jennifer through do the same cohort together, but we joined a mastermind together and we're certified. And so I've known Jennifer since 2021. So over the years. And I'll read Jennifer's bio now. So as a coach at I Am Somebody and through her podcast, Back on Track, Jennifer empowers individual control over their mental health and addiction, helping them build confidence and recognize their inherent value. Her coaching blends real life experiences with reality TV lessons, creating relatable and engaging pathways for personal growth. Having transformed her own life from self-destructive behaviors and daily substance use to a place of and purpose, Jennifer understands the journey firsthand. She's overcome crippling social anxiety, faced her fears, like her first plane ride, and emerged from severe depression that once kept her bedridden for months. Now she wakes up early, embracing life fully rather than merely existing. Passionate about community development and harm reduction, Jennifer also serves as a women's community development worker at Positive Health Network. She's dedicated to creating safe spaces and impactful programs for vulnerable populations, empowering others to realize they too are somebody. So before we get into the main question, I'll be asking you, how did you decide to do what you're doing today?
It was always about helping people. And when I realized that, I felt like I learned some very valuable tools that can really change people's lives, and people don't have to be suffering the way they do, and I can be able to help them. I was like, yeah, it's what I want to do.
Yeah. And how did you decide to choose the life coach school program?
The life coach school is because I first started listening to Brooke through her podcasts, and just listening to her podcasts made a world of difference in my life. I had quit smoking cigarettes. I had, in my view, I had overcome depression. My anxiety was so much better. I wasn't drinking every day or even drinking in bouts, because I started drinking in bouts, and it was just changed my life so much. And that was just from listening to her free podcast. And so I wanted to have the education to back up really what I've already learned and really just go into more detail and more depth about it all. And so what better way than to join and get taught through the life coach school.
Oh my gosh, I so relate to that. That's similar to me. I mean, I listened to her free podcast too, and just hearing the concepts, I was like, oh, I can use these concepts for myself. And I thought I didn't have to do the certification program, and I could just share it with my clients already. But I really wanted to have that solid background to really learn to teach the tools. So I definitely relate to that. So how have you gotten in your way, in your own way in the past?
Oh, yes. When I knew this was the topic, I'm like, I could pick so many things.
Yeah.
But I guess we kind of talked on, mentioned a little about what I want to talk about anyway. Is like really, it's like depression and anxiety, and like then like my overall drinking, and
Mm,
like you had mentioned, like my depression was so bad that I was in the psych ward. I was,
mm,
self-harming. I just was depressed all the time, and I was soon after, a few years, my anxiety popped up. And then I felt like I was had depression, anxiety, like every day of my life. It was never going away. Even the days I felt better, it was still there. But so I started to drink because I didn't want to feel these feelings and I wanted to feel, normal. And it's funny because like I drank for a few different reasons. I drank because like when I was out in social settings, I wanted to be more fun. I wanted to feel like I fit in and I just wanted to feel more confident. And then when I was at home in that, I would drink because I didn't want to feel the depression and the sadness and the loneliness and the anxiety. And so when listening to Brooke's podcast, I was listening to her and she was explaining the model and how, like, all the circumstances and situations in our lives are just, that situations and they're neutral. They're not good or bad, right?
mhm.
And that I got to choose how I wanted to see them and those, and what I wanted to think about. And like those thoughts were what's going to really shape and give me the feelings I'm having. And I realized I was in control of how I felt all along. And I just was going in the wrong direction. I was focusing on the negative and focusing on like what people would say about me and things like that. And so I just kind of decided to change really my thought process around and start really exploring the thoughts I was having and the feelings I was having. And so yeah, I kind of forgot your question, but I'm just rambling.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the model because I've talked about that on the podcast as well. So I think most of my listeners have heard about that. But I think like what you're sharing is that, our circumstances are things that happen around us. And sometimes we think they happen to us, but we can think that instead of like happening to us, we can think that they happen for us. And even that change of like thought can help, And I
Hmm.
think that's like what you were mentioning about how you started to change the way you thought about your circumstances and then you started to have more control or you started to manage your thoughts differently and then maybe felt more control over your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, like, one thing I like tell people is like, I always just say, I hate people who lie, I hate people who lie. But like, I lie to myself on a daily basis and don't even
Mm,
realize it just by the thoughts I tell myself. And it's like, I realize I can take a step back and I can like examine those thoughts. Just because I'm having a thought, number one, doesn't mean I have to believe it.
oh
It
my
doesn't
God.
mean it's true, especially just because it came from my own mind. Like it could be a lie, it could be wrong, could have false information in there. And 9 out of 10 times it usually does. And so that was a huge like mic drop for me when I learned that as well. It's like number one, like I have control over the thoughts I'm having. I really do. Like I can practice new thoughts. I can start, and I have the control over how I'm feeling by what thoughts I'm gonna, I was so for so long, so I would say obsessed with how other people viewed me and, how do I look to other people? And so I really am, and I still am learning to step away and like not care what other people think in that because those are just their thoughts versus mine. And again, I'm rambling.
No, I love what you said about how you used to be like, oh, I don't like people who lie, but you recognize that you are lying to yourself. And the fact, and I,
Mhm.
I think a lot of people don't realize that the thoughts that they have are optional. We just think that whatever we think is like true or it has to be true or there's some truth to it. And that might be partly true, but also we can choose our thoughts on purpose. And I think that is the game changer because we don't have to believe what we think. And I think most of us really believe what we think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate hearing you say that because it just gives people it gives people opportunities to be like, okay, well, if I'm thinking this about myself, is that really true? Or do I want it to be true? Right. And
Yeah.
then you mentioned also being concerned about what other people thought about you. And those are just their own thoughts. And it sounds like what's more important is what you think about you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've learned too, like if I'm so focused on what other people are thinking about me, it's like now I'm really, those are like the thoughts I'm having about myself, right? Like I'm just so
Mm.
focused, but now it's like I'm thinking that way about myself. And do I really want to think like these, these ways? And so again, it's all about really taking the thought and, it's like taking the thought out of your head, putting it down and really examining it. And just asking the questions like, is this thought true? Do I want it to be true? Because you have that choice, right? Like
Yeah.
we have so much more control in our lives than I ever realized growing up. Where
Hmm.
like I really say this stuff should be taught in schools, like
Yeah.
because it's, even though it seems common sense, it's not common sense because we don't get it, right? Unless somebody is straight out saying, look, like, circumstance, it's neutral,
Mhm.
there's not a good thing or a bad thing about it until you put some thought behind it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
Yeah. And I think another thing too that goes along with in the model is what we make a circumstance mean creates our feelings
yeah,
about that thing. And we think it's the circumstance that creates our feelings so that we have no control over our feelings. Because if it's something out there that's like causing us to feel something, then whatever happens out there is always going to create our feelings. But there's that little space between out there and our feelings. And that space is our thoughts about what's going on out there.
yeah,
So we create our own feelings through
yeah.
our thoughts about things.
Taking that control back because you have the control all along. It was like every time I drank, it was me picking up the bottle. It was me choosing to pick up the bottle. It was me choosing to go and order it or go to the beer store or the bar or wherever. Those were my choices. And so it was like if I'm, in control and these are the choices I'm making and my life is not the greatest and I want to go down this other road, like why am I choosing these? Like
Mm.
it's up to me, right? I have the control either or, so why am I choosing this way?
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate that too because it's like what you said, it's easy to blame other things or other people for our behaviors and that way we don't have to take responsibility because taking responsibility is hard and
Yeah,
scary.
yeah. And nobody wants to be at fault for why their life's going shitty, right? Yeah, and we have control no matter what, right? And so, like, even if we're choosing to be miserable, like, that takes energy too, right? And it's not always, yeah. And so it's like, for the longest time, was letting circumstances and situations and what people would say to me or about me, or like not being invited to a party when like all my
Mhm.
other friends were, or things like that really get me down and depressed. And I was like, in my room crying all the time. I was, would totally self-isolate from my family, from anybody. And then when I did go out, like I would just drink like a fish or like get completely high on whatever I could. And I was just taking all the energy and all that and putting it into what other people were thinking about me. And
Mhm.
it to me was just right. Like if, somebody said something or did something to me, then it was like that way was the right way and there's something wrong with me. And
Mhm.
I gave everybody around me so much control over how I was feeling on a daily basis that I felt like I had no control over it. I felt like, I end up in the psych ward numerous times. I was on so many different kind of medications and the medications never really worked for me.
Mhm.
And it was because it wasn't like a chemical imbalance or anything that was making me feel this way. It was because I was listening to what people were saying and doing and all that and taking it and making it mean like it was something was wrong with me. And I didn't have control over any of that.
Mhm.
And I still don't, right? Like I don't have control over what people are going to say to me or if I get invited to a party. I have control if I show up or not, but I don't have, I don't have control over any of that, but I have control over like what do I want to make any of that stuff mean about me,
Mhm.
about them, about any of it, and that's where like the work comes in is like again, really sitting there and be like, for myself, when I'm feeling down, when I'm feeling anxious, when I'm feeling any kind of feeling, even sometimes when I'm feeling really happy, because there's times now that I'm feeling happy, enjoying that, and I'm not used to it. So it's like,
Mhm.
I need to examine those too and figure out where they're coming from and just to remind
Mhm.
myself, like, I am making those feelings happen. And
Yeah.
so I'll literally sit there and I'll ask myself, like, what feeling am I feeling right now? Like, depressed. Okay, so why am I feeling depressed? And right away, my brain will go to all these circumstances or whatever is
Mhm.
happening, going on. And I get to sit back and be like, no, like, what is really happening here? Like, what are my thoughts about this? And then just kind of examining and all that and really putting the pieces together on, like, again, like, isn't even true. Like,
Mhm.
like I could say, oh, I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling angry because, of what Joe said to me. And, Joe told me I was a complete bitch and was telling me I'm no good at this and this and that. And then really I can sit down and be like, but did Joe really say all that?
Mhm.
No, Joe just said he'd rather do it this way. But my
Mm.
brain put in all this other extra overload work and thoughts into it. And even though I know for a fact the words he said, I'm still listening to my brain and believing my brain with all that additional content. And so
Yeah.
really sitting there and having to like separate it all is like, yeah, it's huge. And it's really helped me. Like I no longer sit in my room for days on end and crying in that.
Mhm.
And like and I can't say that. There's been like since I started this work, there's two different occasions where I've let myself sit in my room and cry for a few days. But I was doing it on purpose. Like
Mhm.
I knew I was feeling crappy. I wanted to feel crappy. I had someone pass away at the one time and I didn't want to feel happy. So I was okay with letting myself sit in my room and be
Yeah.
miserable in that. But so the difference now is like I know I have the control and I'm taking that control and I may choose to feel happy, I may choose not to.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm just rambling again.
Well, I mean, that is really important. Like, first, I want to go back to, the example of like what Joe said, right? And he
Yeah,
said, like, oh, I think we should do it this way. But then your brain added all this story around that phrase.
yeah,
And it was like, oh, well, Joe doesn't want to work with me. He doesn't think I'm competent. He thinks I'm rude or whatever. But
yeah,
it's really just he said certain words, and then you added all this, your brain added all the story around that, and then came up with this and it's like a false situation. It's like we make something bigger than it maybe actually is. And that's with our thoughts about what the circumstance is.
yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah,
also going back to like what you said about allowing yourself to sit in your room and cry for a few days and feel sad on purpose versus like automatically or unconsciously doing that and thinking like, oh, I have no control over the way I feel. This is just hard and painful. It's never going to end. Versus like, okay, I'm going to feel sad about this because this is a sad situation for me. I'm making it mean that that this person that died is sad for me and I want to feel sad.
yeah,
And I think sometimes with especially with grief, like I don't know if it's I think it's our culture and society kind of tells us to like, just grieve for like a little bit of time. And then you should be done grieving in
yeah,
this certain amount of time frame, but that doesn't always happen. And so allowing yourself to grieve and to feel sad on purpose is also important.
yeah. Absolutely, right? And like and again, it's like reminding yourself there's nothing wrong with yourself for allowing yourself to feel, or if are gonna grieve longer than what people say you should grieve. Like you're human and it's normal, and there's no right or wrong way to do any of
Mhm.
it. There's no right or
Mhm.
wrong way to feel sadness, and like for how long, for any situation or happiness or whatever. And so people have to remind themselves that. And for me, that's something I have to constantly remind myself is like, I'm human. Like, because I'll be like, why do I feel this way? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have these thoughts? Right. And it's like, because I'm
Yeah.
human, because I've experienced a bunch of things in life and my brain has chalked up, brought in these thoughts and beliefs. And now I get to like play around with them. Because when they were coming up as I was growing up, I just believed them all. I didn't
Hmm.
question them. Now, when I have new thoughts come into play, I question them. So they will be a little easier to, change or to alter if they're not the thoughts I want. But like
Yeah.
growing up, we have all these thoughts in our head that keep adding up and we keep repeating the same thoughts. So it's going to be a little bit harder to change those thoughts than.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's those like neuro pathways that are have deep grooves versus the fact that we can actually make new neural pathways and let those ones have deep grooves, and we're making those ones on purpose versus not just from like childhood stuff or like past stuff that we didn't even want to believe on purpose. They were just got ingrained in us,
Hmm.
probably mostly by accident, and then we just start to believe those things and think
Yeah.
that this is the way it always is or this is the way it always has to be, but that's not actually true. Yeah. And I also, you said something earlier too about, like, well, we can talk about this, about feelings and how I think you're human, right? And you are allowed, actually, we want to experience a lot of the feelings on the spectrum of emotions that we have. And by denying ourselves, like, oh, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or why do I have to do this thing? Or like, why do I feel this way? And it's like, oh, because I'm human. And this
Yeah.
is what happens to human beings. So I
Yeah.
think that that's really important to acknowledge too. It's like, where do we get the idea that we're supposed to be like stoic robots all the time?
Right. But it's because like growing up, like I remember like, and like I loved my parents, they were great parents, but it was like, don't cry over that. Like stop
Mm,
crying. Like,
hmm.
and it's like, oh, if you're gonna sulk or you're gonna cry, go to your room. And like, so it's like without even realizing growing up, our parents were conditioning us to like not feel certain feelings. And
Yeah.
I'm sure like that wasn't their point or their purpose, but
Mm,
that's just what our brains took it as.
yeah. Oh my God, that's that's such a great point. Okay, so as we wrap up, I'm curious, knowing what you know now, what advice or support would you tell your past self that was struggling?
Oh boy. I guess I would just honestly, I would be telling them about the model. I would be telling me about the model. I would
Yeah.
be reminding myself that, life is going to happen and, you may not have control over all of it, but you have a good portion, good control over a good portion of it. And that's where you want to focus your energy. Don't focus on what somebody said to you, the words somebody said to you. Focus on, you know, what you want to make that mean for you and,
Mhm.
go that way. And it's okay to feel sad and it's okay to feel hurt.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with you either because I always made that mean something was wrong with me. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my God, I can relate to that so much. It's like
yeah,
I'm weak for feeling this way, or I'm bad, or I'm wrong for feeling this way. I shouldn't be feeling this way. But it's like now it's like I allow myself to feel everything. So I'm really glad you said that. And so if people want to connect with you on social media or from your website, how would they do that?
On Instagram, I am somebody two. I am underscore somebody underscore two. My website is www.iamsomebody2.com. Um, yeah. Jennifer Bulbrook on Facebook is probably the easiest way to find me on there.
Okay, and I'll put that all in the show notes too. So thank
Awesome.
you for
Thank you.
sharing that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It sounds like today's message is that we have more, well, we can learn that we have more control over our life through the way we want to think about our circumstances and how we
Yeah.
want to feel about those circumstances as well. And that it's our thoughts that is creating our reality and our feelings.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Jennifer. And thanks to those of you listening. I'm so glad you joined me for this episode of Get Out of Your Own Way. To go even deeper, you can join me for Self Care Sundays, monthly drop in sessions, and you can find out more about that at thehealingmodalities.com. You can also sign up for my weekly Self Care Seeds newsletter there and join me for Get Out of Your Own Way again every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Central, and 3:30 p.m. Pacific. Next time on Get Out of Your Own Way, I'll be having another guest join me to talk about how they've gotten in and out of their own way. So until next time, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You have been listening to Get Out of Your Own Way. Get out of your way and get what you want through transformative self-care with me, April Yee. Tune in every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. In each episode, I present new questions that support you in building up your beliefs about yourself. To connect with me or for more information, you can email me at thehealingmodalities@gmail.com or visit my website, thehealingmodalities.com. See you soon.